Hey, Boo.
Greetings, it's Mrs. Klein.
And Mr. Creighton.
We're here today, you guys, with your podcast for Lesson 33, The Renaissance Begins. If you want to follow along with your history book, you can find this lesson. It begins on page 461. There's a guiding question, as always, and this go-round it is, what changes in Europe led to the Renaissance?
All right, and we have 7 terms, so a little bit more terms this time. They are city-state, classical art, humanism, humanities, individualism, Renaissance, and republic.
All right, you guys, beginning with the introduction. Toward the end of the Middle Ages, a great flowering of culture called the Renaissance began in Italy. The Renaissance inspired interest in art and education throughout Europe.
Renaissance is a French word that means rebirth. Historians use the word to describe the rebirth of widespread interest in classical art and learning that occurred in Europe from about 1300 to about 1600 CE.
In this lesson, you will explore how the Renaissance differed from the Middle Ages and classical times. Then you will examine some changes in European life that led to the Renaissance.
All right, guys, looking at section 1, what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance began in Italy in the 1300s and spread to other parts of Europe in the 1400s and 1500s. Let's look more closely at this great rebirth of interest in classical art and learning. Then we will explore the link between the Renaissance and the classical world.
All right, you guys, the Renaissance began with the rediscovery of the classical world of ancient Greece and Rome. In the late Middle Ages, merchants and crusaders returned with goods and ideas from the East, including classical learning that had been preserved in the Byzantine Empire. Europeans also read classical works that came to them from Muslim scholars.
This flow of ideas led to a rediscovery of Greek and Roman culture. Classical art. The classical period lasted from about 500 BCE to 500 CE. The classical artists of Greece and Rome created sculptures, pottery, murals, and mosaics to show the importance of ordinary people and civic leaders as well as gods and goddesses. Figures were lifelike but often idealized or more perfect than in real life. And in paintings, there was little background or sense of perspective.
All right, now in comparison to that, there's medieval art. Medieval artists created stained glass windows, sculptures, illuminated manuscripts, paintings, and tapestries, all of which were primarily used to teach religion to people who could not read or write. Important figures in the paintings were shown larger than others, and the painted figures looked two-dimensional or flat.
All right, now looking at Renaissance art. Artists used new techniques to create sculptures, murals, drawings, and paintings. The aim of much Renaissance art was to show the importance of people and nature, not just religious ideas. In Renaissance art, figures looked lifelike and three-dimensional, reflecting an increasing knowledge of anatomy. And there was also full backgrounds that showed perspective, adding depth. Renaissance artists were inspired more by classical art than by medieval art.
All right, now we're moving on to section 2 about the growth of trade and commerce. One reason for the flowering of culture during the Renaissance was the growth of trade and commerce. Trade brought new ideas as well as goods into Europe. A bustling economy created prosperous cities and new classes of people with the wealth to support art and learning.
Starting in the 11th century, the Crusades strengthened contacts between Western Europe and the Byzantine and Muslim cultures. Merchants brought goods and ideas from the East that helped to reawaken interest in classical culture.
All right, now, then there's a new economy. This increase in trade led to a new kind of economy. During the Middle Ages, people bartered or traded goods. By the Renaissance, people were using coins to buy merchandise, which created a money economy.
Some merchants and bankers grew very rich, and their abundant wealth enabled them to make their cities more beautiful. Prosperous Renaissance cities grew into flourishing educational and cultural centers.
All right, now let's talk about the influence of those Italian city-states. So the Renaissance began in northern and central Italy. One reason why it began there was the prosperity of Italian city-states.
The Italian city-states conducted their own trade, collected their own taxes, and made their own laws. Some, such as Florence, were republics that were governed by elected councils.
All right, during the Renaissance, groups of guild members called boards often ruled city-states as well. And trade made the Italian city-states dazzlingly wealthy.
The city-states' wealth encouraged a boom in art, literature, and learning. Rich families paid for the creation of statues, paintings, beautiful buildings, and elegant avenues.
All right, that's moving into the growth of humanism. The interest in learning during the Renaissance was spurred on by humanism. This way of thinking sought to balance religious faith with an emphasis on individual dignity and an interest in nature and human society.
Humanism first arose in Italy as a result of the renewed interest in classical culture. One of the first humanists was an Italian poet named Francisco Petrarch. Eventually, he created a large collection of ancient Latin and Greek texts, which he made available to other scholars.
Scholars from all over Europe traveled to Italy to learn about the new humanist ideas inspired by classical culture. In their studies of classical culture, humanists discovered a new way of looking at life.
Humanists believe that all people have the ability to control their own lives and achieve greatness. In education, they stressed study of the humanities, a group of subjects that focus on human life and culture, which includes grammar, rhetoric, which is the study of persuasive language, history, pottery, and ethics.
Poetry,
Not pottery. And ethics, which is the study of moral values and behavior. They tried to improve on the work of the ancient Greeks and Romans.
All right. Humanists separated the state and its right to rule from the church, and in doing so, helped lay the foundation for modern thinking about politics and government. In general, Renaissance thinkers prized individual achievement more than a person's class or family. This emphasis on individualism was an enormous shift from the medieval thinking.
The humanists' new ideas sometimes brought them into conflict with the Catholic Church. Most tried to balance religious faith and its emphasis on the afterlife with an active interest in daily life, but some directly challenged teachings that were important to the church.
All right, you guys, in this lesson, we learned a little bit about the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a flowering of art and learning that was inspired by a rediscovery of the classical cultures of Greece and Rome. It began in Italy around 1300 and spread throughout Europe, lasting to the early 1600s.
The growth of trade and commerce. Italy's location made it a perfect crossroads for trade between Europe and Asia, which began to increase at this time. The growth of trade and commerce created prosperous cities and classes of people with enough wealth to support education and the arts.
All right, now the influence of Italian city-states. The developing wealth and power of the individual Italian city-states helped to promote and spread Renaissance ideas. Civic leaders and wealthy private individuals paid for new works of art and built new centers of learning.
Finally, the growth of humanism. The new philosophy of humanism spurred interest in learning and fresh ways of thinking. Humanists, such as Francisco Petrarch, sought to balance religious faith with an emphasis on individualism, the workings of the natural world, and human society. They sought to separate the workings of government from the church.
All right, by now, you guys, you should be able to answer that guiding question, which is, what changes in Europe led to the Renaissance?
A quick reminder of those terms: city-state, classical art, humanism, humanities, individualism, Renaissance, and republic. All right, guys.
So long, suckers.